and of course a chalkboard for their lessons. And with the help of generous Facebook readers or followers, since then, and I've been back not quite a year now, but since then, in addition to writing the book, we've been helping them get doors and windows for their church so they don't have mosquitoes or the cold, and then beds for the kids. The kids were sleeping on bare dirt, so now they have beds, bunk beds, and they've got mattresses and sheets and blankets and pillows. And then got a couple more sewing machines, and right now we're working on a chicken coop with Heifer International, really great organization. A lot of people are probably familiar with them. And we're trying to get a chicken coop so that the chickens will provide meat for their diet, which they don't have currently, will provide eggs for their diet, and they can also sell the eggs to create additional opportunities for the orphanage.
Oh, wow, that sounds very, very promising.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that it does. And the part that has mystified me all along in a lot of these countries is the government is happy to step in and interfere. The government is happy to step in and give orders. The government is happy to step in with some corrupt official having their hand out and wanting a piece of the action, especially if they find out you have a Western benefactor. But the government doesn't do anything to step up and say, yeah, wow, we didn't really know about these kids. Let us contribute. Let us buy you the piece of land. Let us get you the chicken coop. Let us build you a building. That's the next step for these kids in the orphanage, by the way, is to get them their own building, because right now the landlord is threatening to kick them out in the next 5 months because he doesn't like the fact that it's expanded from a church into a church and an orphanage. So we're hoping to build a building. That'll take about $20,000, I think. And I'm hoping that it'll come about between programs like this, generous support of Facebook followers, and then places like GoFundMe and Indiegogo and funding organizations like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell us a little about liberating the American businessman who was a political prisoner in Djibouti. How did that come about?
I was just at a hotel. Djibouti is really hot. Dubai is really hot. There's certain places, Rich, that you just don't hang outside a lot in the wrong time of year, and you can't always time that when you're on an epic journey. And it was just really hot. So I spent a lot of time inside this air-conditioned hostel and trying to write and keep in touch with people at home. And this fellow came walking across the room to me, and he said, "Hey, I heard you're a writer." And I said, yeah. And he said, "Well, you got to hear my story." And he had invested at the invitation of the Djibouti government a lot of money, including $1.8 million of his own money, into power generation because they were short of electrical power. And he started this business, and it became very successful, as was fairly predictable. And then the government functionaries, including the president and the finance minister, came in and said, "We want, I think it was 29% of your business to start out with." And he and his partner refused. The gentleman's name, by the way, is Dallas Peavy. And Dallas refused to give up a portion of his business. He could have been convicted under American law for doing that, by the way. And he refused to give up the business, and so they went through some legal motions, and they found out that the controller that had been assigned to them, because that's part of Djibouti law, it's really part of their corruption scheme, but the controller that had been assigned to them had already embezzled $150,000 in 3 months. And so they took him to court, and they got a judgment, surprisingly, in Djibouti court against this fellow. And the day before that he was supposed to go in and be sentenced, he took off for Canada. Why Canada? No extradition treaty. And as soon as they got the telephone call that he was safely ensconced in Canada, they put Dallas Peavy and his partner in jail for 40 days. And Dallas lost 40 pounds, and was treated very, very badly. And when they finally let him out, he had not only lost a lot of weight, but they took his house, his car, all of his personal possessions, left him no money. They'd let his bank accounts dry, and then left him having to beg his wife's parents on the island nation of Palau for money. And so that's when I ran into him, and he said, "You've got to help get me out of here." So then we brainstormed for the 3 days that I was there and kept in touch afterward. And wonderful man in Oregon who had worked with him 10 years previously came in and helped. And so the three of us kind of made up a committee to get him out of the country. And then finally we got him out of the country on the guise of a job interview in Nigeria.
Curiosity, why wasn't our American government more proactive in trying to do something to help this guy?
Because they were part of the scam. Our government is, don't get me started. The American government is a patsy in Djibouti. They are all over the world, but in Djibouti, we have the only American military base in virtually all of Africa. And it's especially important because it's in the Horn of Africa, facing Iraq and Iran. This is where the American drones are run out of, the guys in the dark room with the joysticks running the drones. It's also where the Navy SEALs were sent out when they got bin Laden. So it's very, very valuable to us. In fact, I'll give you an example of how valuable this was. The French had abandoned a base. And when their lease came up, the French didn't want it anymore. And the U.S. took it over and paid, I forget, $63 million a year or something. I think it was something like 400 acres. Don't quote me on the number. I'd have to go back and look at my writing. But nobody took into account why the French had abandoned it, and it was open season. It was because it was in a floodplain. But it was available, and so the U.S. government took it and created a base there and then expanded the base because they needed it so badly for the drones and for the Navy CVs and their construction equipment and for the SEALs and all the rest. It's the only African country that would let us in on that basis. So whatever they said, the U.S. just basically bowed down and said, sure, okay. And they were renegotiating the lease, and Dallas and his partner became pawns at the time. And until that lease was finalized, Dallas and his partner were kept in prison.
So they were simply wrong place, wrong time. Is that what you're saying, Larry?
Among other things, yes. Yeah, they had peeved the powers that be by challenging. I forgot to mention the controller who had slipped off to Canada was the brother-in-law of the country finance minister, and also related to the president of the country. And in my travels to 96 countries, I've not heard of a country quite as corrupt as Djibouti. Everybody seems to have their hand in the pot, and it's very expensive, and everybody's trying to grift you. From the moment you cross the border, taxi drivers, doesn't make any difference who it is. Everybody has got their hand in the pot and is trying to get even more out of you. The one exception that I ran into in Djibouti City was a restaurant owner who ran the Le Carrefour restaurant, and I will never forget him. He was such a kind man, and he even admitted that his country was a cesspool of corruption.
That's frightening that it's such a widespread level there. And do you see anything happening to get better, or will it just continue to get worse? We have a long-term lease there, Rich. I don't see it getting any better, honestly. My politics are probably different than most, and I'm really not going to go into it, but I think that we've become way too accommodating and not stood up for what our rights and opportunities are, and have not demanded recognition for example, how generous Americans are internationally. And, sometimes you want a seat at the table, and sometimes you just want to have your say, and sometimes you want influence. And I think we've sacrificed an awful lot in this particular case just in order to get a drone base. And you can run drones off of aircraft carriers, and our aircraft carriers are allowed to go anywhere.
So you don't need to be supporting and upholding a corrupt regime in order to run drones or to jump Navy SEALs off at any particular location at any time. We've got 14 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. We can do that anywhere. It's called the ability to project power. Nobody can do it like the United States.
What's so alarming is with the advanced technology that we've got, the ability to alleviate problems worldwide, and yet these corrupt governments are thriving, and the human rights abuses, obviously, that you've mentioned just in the past few minutes are running rampant. I'm sure that's in many countries throughout Africa and throughout the world.
Well, we're in a position where we don't want to be seen as the ugly Americans and the guys who shake the big stick first and talk second. And that comes probably as an advancement, in our foreign policy up to the time that you get your own diplomats killed in a place like Libya or in Yemen, where at the merest hint of violence, you drive out your entire embassy, burn all your papers, have everybody walk out with their hands up in the air, surrender your vehicles, and then get onto a ship without even being attacked. That's when it's gone too far. And that's what's beginning to happen with our foreign policy now. We've become quite accommodating, and I don't know, there's a fine line in there somewhere, but when you start surrendering and don't allow your Marines to protect you on your own sacred property, something is wrong. And I think most of the country would agree with me.
Absolutely. Something's gone wrong somewhere, absolutely. In your African travels, there's in Kenya, the Maasai tribe. They've given you a nickname. I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but I'm going to try Onki Rakoi.
Very, very good, Rich. You're close. Yeah. That was one of the highlights of the trip. Personally, I still got this. It's made from cow bone, and it's a Maasai warrior, and it's on a lanyard around my neck. And I had stayed there with the Maasai on the edge of the Mara Maasai National Game Preserve for 3 days. Lived in a mud hut, and I had the most wonderful time because every day was a new excursion, and you lived with the Maasai like the Maasai lived. Ate their food, took their walkabouts. I got to throw some of their weapons, fired their caveman era bows and arrows, through their spears, the whole kit. And this thing that they gave me at the end, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's really quite nice. That's a wonderful gift. What is it? And he says, well, this is emblematic of an Okirikoi. And I went, an Okirikoi, really? What does that mean? And you have to remember that the Maasai are a cattle-based culture. In fact, their ratio is for every 10 cattle that you own, you can buy yourself another wife. And so he said, you're an Okirikoi. That means you don't own any cattle, you wander too much, and you don't stay home and take care of business. And I said, can you tattoo that on my forehead? That's absolutely perfect. That describes me perfectly. So, yeah, I can't afford any cattle, can't afford any more wives, and wander too much, and don't stay home and take care of business except to write about it.
Out of the 36 countries, which ones did you find to be the friendliest and the most welcoming and the most hospitable to Americans?
That is an absolutely excellent question. And I've had occasion, as I have traveled in 96 countries, to ask other people who travel frequently or travel a lot, for example, whether it's on business or just personally like I do. And one of those countries that comes up repeatedly is Turkey. One of the reasons is the people there are extremely hospitable. They're very welcoming. They're open to Americans. Most countries do like the American dollar. They have, for example, Istanbul is the only major city in the world that is split by two continents. There's the western half that is in Europe and the eastern half that is in Asia. And in between, you got the Bosphorus, and you got all this incredible ferry traffic and boats and so forth, going back and forth between the two. And you've got multiple cultures, you've got multiple forms of dress, multiple forms, styles of food. It's a wonderful food. Oh my God! And then multiple religions, of course, too. And then you've got this dreamy architecture from the incredible, for example, in Istanbul, there's the Hagia Sophia, which is built by the Emperor Constantine back around 430 AD, something like that, and for 1,000 years was way ahead of its time, and it was the strongest church in the world, and was not surpassed as a piece of architecture until the Cathedral of Seville in the 1500s. And what happened, of course, is the city finally fell to the Ottoman Turks, and they toppled the towers on it, and they put up minarets in its place. And it's the same thing that happened in Spain. Spain was lost and then regained over a 700-year period, and so it went through lots of different architectural changes where Christian churches and castles had their towers lopped off. They became minarets, and then it was reconquered. Those minarets were dropped, and they became fortified towers or something again. So that's Turkey is one of the countries by far that it was one of my favorites. Surprisingly, Mongolia was also, and I think one of the reasons is I just did not have much chance to do any research ahead of time on Mongolia to find out what was there, and so it was all a complete surprise. I knew I was going to land at the airport and go to a particular hostel, and that was about it. And when I got there, I asked the locals, okay, I've got 4 days here, what should I do? And they sent me out on this organized trip that they put together in about an hour and a half, and it was just incredible. Stayed in a yurt, they call them a ger, G-E-R, for about 3 days. I went to the world's largest equestrian statue of Genghis Khan out in the middle of the Mongolian steppe. Went to Mongolian wedding, which is quite a raucous affair, and also I've never seen so much food at a wedding. The tables were literally bowed under with the weight of the food. They had so much. Just a wonderful time. Again, very, very friendly people. No anti-Americanism at all. And then some of my other favorites were South Korea. And let's see, South Africa was really quite amazing. It's 16 days there at the beginning of the trip. And very, very friendly. One of the things that I liked the most was after the fall of apartheid, blacks in South Africa were feeling confident that they weren't going to be victimized. You could see their confidence, and you could see in the way that they acted. And they might be kind of surly or sullen toward the Dutch, but very friendly towards Americans, and much more friendly toward British also. So that was one of my favorite portions. It has a huge variety to the life and the landscape and different ethnic groups in South Africa. I'll think of some others as we go along. Yeah, Israel. Loved Israel, Rich.
Great.
It's a beautiful land. Surprising grape wine industry there. So much rich cultural heritage from Islam, from Christianity, from Jewish tradition, and then of course you kind of got this underlying tension there because of Palestinian aspirations and because of the outright attacks that are taking place by Hamas.